Hi, Johan from Amoya Chiropractic in Maastricht. Recently I made a social media post about ending a 36-hour fast with this delicious mixture of bone broth and some added ghee to it. And this generated some questions and interest from followers online, but also here in the practice with people asking questions or making comments ranging from the obvious, like, why do you do that, to not eating for so long is unhealthy, isn't it? Well, with this video, I would like to share with you the various forms of fasting and what some of the benefits are of prolonged fasting. Now, please, however, note that this content presented here is for informational or educational purposes only and does not substitute any professional medical advice or a consultation with a healthcare professional. So, what is fasting? Well, simply put, it is an extended period of time where you do not consume any calories whatsoever, not from food and not from liquids. However, water, certain teas and black coffee are allowed. The simplest form of fasting is called intermittent fasting, where you divide a period of 24 hours up into an eating window where you do consume calories and a fasting window where you do not. And this fasting window can range anything from 16 hours to 23 hours. You also have other forms of fasting, such as alternate day fasting, which simply means eating one day and fasting the other, and also the 5-2 split, where 5 days of the week you simply just eat normally, while the other 2 you restrict your calories to, well, from 500 to 600 calories per day. Longer fasts, typically lasting more than 24 hours, as you would expect, means that you go for much longer periods of time without consuming any calories. To understand what the benefits of fasting are, we need to briefly look at what happens when we do eat and then what happens when we do not eat. Whenever we eat or drink something that contains any of the macronutrients, that would be fat, protein or carbohydrates, the content are broken down through the process of digestion into their most simplest forms. Fat is broken down into what's called glycerol and fatty acids, protein into amino acids, and carbohydrates into glucose, also more commonly known as sugar. We need these various building blocks, glucose, amino acids, glycerol and fatty acids, for energy, to heal, repair and build new cells and tissues in our body. Now, upon absorption of these nutrients into our bloodstream, it stimulates our pancreas to release a hormone called insulin. Glucose, or sugar, has the largest stimulatory effect on the release of insulin, which allows glucose to enter our cells and to be used as a source of energy. This way, insulin ensures that a rapid rise in blood glucose levels, also called hyperglycemia, gets lowered again towards a narrowly regulated level. Now, take a moment to reflect on your own eating habits during a typical day. You may have been told that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, or perhaps you skip it to later snack on something, then eat lunch, followed by supper, while snacking in between and afterwards. Also, considering the average intake of carbohydrates here in the Netherlands is about 230 grams per day, which most likely consists of things such as cereals, bread, pasta, and sugary drinks, every time you eat, and particularly when eating a diet rich in processed carbohydrates, you stimulate the release of insulin to remove the excess glucose from your blood into your cells. Whenever we consume too much glucose, it gets stored in our liver and our muscle cells and eventually as fat in fat cells as reserves. Excessive stimulation of insulin can actually have negative consequences for the pancreas. It can lead to what's called burnout of the cells producing insulin, which means that the pancreas cannot keep up with creating enough insulin to accommodate this frequent rise in blood glucose levels. But the cells in our body can actually develop what's called insulin resistance, where they no longer effectively respond to the messages of insulin. And both of these scenarios, too much glucose in our blood and a resistance to insulin, has been associated with many diseases of modern lifestyle, such as high blood pressure, coronary artery disease, obesity, chronic inflammation, and type 2 diabetes. One of the benefits, therefore, of going for longer periods of time without eating is that you end up restoring the sensitivity of your cells to insulin, to have the cells of the pancreas to rest and recover from having to produce too much insulin too often, and to have less frequent and excessive spikes or fluctuations in your blood sugar levels. Studies such as these two, published in the journal Cell Metabolism and Clinical Diabetes and Endocrinology, have shown that intermittent fasting can have beneficial effects on insulin, blood pressure, and diabetes. I mentioned earlier that one of the functions of insulin is to store excess glucose in our liver, muscles, and fat cells. Now, for the majority of our existence, we as humans naturally experienced periods of famine and intermittent periods where we actually had food to eat. Therefore, we needed some type of energy storage mechanism during periods where food was abundant, but also one which we could transport around with us as we moved about. And remember, this was before the times of fridges or 24/7 delivery, where we now just have access to food all around us. And if we therefore pay particular attention as to where fat reserves gets deposited on the body, and that's around the abdominal area, the waist, and the upper thighs, it's actually yet another example of the intelligence of our body to store it in areas where it does not impede our movement. So it's not on our lower legs or on the upper back, but actually around our center of gravity. And this can be likened to a fanny pack, which we carry around with us to have access to on-the-go energy during periods of famine. Furthermore, you may or may not be aware of this, but our body used to be very, very efficient at burning fat as a fuel source, not only sugar. But a problem with frequent eating and consuming calories, again particularly processed carbohydrates, is that our body never gets used to using its own stored reserves of glucose. Therefore, we just keep on adding into this fanny pack and never really taking anything out. And what makes this even more problematic is that chronically high levels of insulin actually blocks processes where our body would naturally break down the stored fat to be used as energy. Therefore, prolonged fasting actually forces our body to start using up its own energy reserves, for example from the liver, and eventually, once insulin resistance is no longer a problem, to start using fat, and particularly in the form of what's called ketones, another form of fuel for our body. Therefore, one of the added benefits of intermittent fasting is the loss of weight, but not necessarily due to restricting the amount of calories that you eat, but by restoring this natural metabolic flexibility our bodies used to have, to use both fat and sugar as energy sources. But the benefits of fasting extends beyond weight loss, since most people tend to make the assumption that when you do not eat, you consume less calories and you will therefore lose weight. While this indeed is true, losing weight is actually the end result of restoring normal metabolism and hormonal regulation within the body, and subsequently reduces your risk of developing lifestyle diseases such as heart disease or diabetes. But it begs the question, does prolonged fasting deliver any other benefits other than losing weight? Well, when we go for longer periods of time without food, and now I'm talking about periods longer than 24 hours, naturally we are not getting the three building blocks, amino acids, glucose, and fatty acids, from outside in the form of food. This therefore forces our body to start looking at internal sources to generate these nutrients. And after fasting 16 or 18 hours or longer, and once our glucose, which were stored in our liver, is depleted, the liver starts breaking down fat to make a substance, as mentioned earlier, known as ketones, a natural source of fuel in the absence of glucose reserves. Now, ketones are actually a very, very good source of energy for the heart, muscles, kidneys, and actually even for the brain. And using ketones as a preferred fuel source can actually heal the body, generate more energy, and help you burn energy in a more cleaner way. And probably one of the more beneficial effects of prolonged fasting, and that now actually means 36 hours or longer, is a process called autophagy, which literally means to eat oneself. Now, I know that in itself would send alarm bells ringing, but this process is actually incredibly intelligent of our body and very beneficial to our cells. So as mentioned, autophagy is a natural process where the body starts recycling unnecessary, old or damaged components found within our body. And this can be from our own cells or even foreign cells such as cancer cells, viruses or bacteria. And with these prolonged fasts, our body is forced to shut down certain unnecessary processes and to start looking for alternative sources of building blocks within the body. It therefore starts identifying old or dysfunctional cells and tissues and recycles them into new cells or parts of cells. This process provides us a crucial defense mechanism against cancers and infections, and can actually also protect our brain against what's called neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Now, I don't know about you, but these are some significant health benefits simply by not eating. Other benefits of prolonged fasting, which is actually beyond the scope of this video, but certainly worth mentioning in brief, they include increased levels of what's called BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which play a huge role in how well our brains age, how well we learn, and how well we perform mentally and emotionally. There's also an increase in what's called human growth hormone, which helps maintain, build, and repair tissue in our body, for example, in the brain and in muscles. It can also boost our metabolism and help burn fat. And in fact, one study shown that after a 3-day fast, our human growth hormone levels can actually increase by 300%. And lastly, in terms of benefits of prolonged fasting, is a healthy gut biome where good bacteria is allowed to flourish through improving and stabilizing the immune system in our gut, which is actually our first line of defense against pathogens such as bacteria and viruses. But that's also a topic for another time. So I hope this was informative and insightful as to the potential benefits of fasting and how to potentially do fasting. And even if it simply just means skipping breakfast and timing you eating, for example, between a 6 to 8 hour period. And this is not meant to be an exhaustive overview of fasting. Since there are just so much more to this topic simply by not eating. So should you have any questions, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comments section, or simply ask me next time you see me in practice. Thank you. Take care.